Okay, thank you for the opportunity to present to this esteemed crowd here in Chicago. As Sira mentioned, I'm a Chicago native. It's always great to come back to Chicago and talk about um, about AEC innovation, especially in the, I guess, what I would call the the Silicon Valley for AEC innovation in Chicago. Last year, if you remember, I don't know if you've been here last year to this event. Robert Tony, my esteemed colleague at Thomas City, he introduced a word called vitality. So I was looking for what is the word that I can introduce to this team this year. And it's not vitality. Vitality is a much more complex term. I'm going to pick an easier term called equilibrium, and drive the conversation through equilibrium. What do we mean by equilibrium, and how do we achieve equilibrium in the space of AEC innovation? So my talk is going to be focused about myself, the firm, and how do we look at equilibrium through the lens of Perkins over the years. So first, a little bit about myself. Okay, you can see this now. A little bit about myself. My personal and professional story can be told using this Hollywood Squares thing, basically, over kind of 4 time scales of time, 4 eras. I'm originally born in India. I studied architecture, but I come from a heavy engineering and construction family. So I've been around the built environment space for quite some time, since my early days. STEM and math was pretty common in India at that time, so was kind of interested in STEM and math. Somehow ended up in architecture, don't ask me why. And then finished architecture, a 5-year program, and then came to the US circa early 90s. Went to graduate school in research, focusing on computing methods. Not that I was an expert in computing methods, but decided to focus on computing methods because it's kind of interesting to talk about it. And then got interested or involved in the intersection of research, data, and the planet. Because Arizona State University that I went to had a keen program on sustainability. Again, I'm talking early 90s now. So a lot of data around energy, and they want somebody to figure out like how to analyze this data. So my thesis, believe it or not, was around scientific visualization in a comfort control system. Not that, again, I was not a computer science major, but got me interested in data and research. Fast forward back to 1994, I came here to Chicago, again, 29 years ago. Started with a company called the Environments Group, which is an interior design firm at that time, as a facility planner. And during my time at the Environments Group, I had a chance to work with Meritech. For people that are in Chicago, you'll know that. The largest telecom company based here in Chicagoland. And I helped create, that's my role as a technologist, help create kind of a CAFM master planning real estate system to manage that 50 million square foot portfolio. That's so kind of another entry into the technology side. Along the way, I also was helping the business of Perkins or the Environments Group run its operations. I had a role of CIO, CFO, put any O and C together. I was doing that. We were a small firm. Fast forward to 2008, after 14 years, Perkins acquired the Environments Group. So I went back, given the scale and kind of global reach of Perkins, I was able to do some pretty cool strategic planning, portfolio occupancy planning work, mostly data-driven, for large-scale portfolio clients like Schneider Electric, CBRE, Google, and Canada. And then took on this role as CIO in 2012, about 10 years ago. Recently, I also took on an additional role within the DAR Group as a CTO, DAR Group being one of the largest AEC firms in the world, with a network of firms of which Perkins is one. So coming back to the word equilibrium, this is the Oxford definition. I should have done the GPT definition, but I decided to go back and kind of got old-fashioned, basically. I won't read it, but like just think about it and remember this as we kind of go through this discussion. Opposing balance. So it's kind of a paradoxical term. What is opposing? What is balance? Let's just weave this through the conversation. I'm going to frame this conversation around 3 key topics. Building a studio. How do you build a team? Meaning the who. What am I doing? Framing the problem. And finding the purpose. When do we do our best work? So think about the who, followed by the what, followed by the why. That's how this conversation could be. I'm going to kind of take it through the lens of Perkins and the journey of Perkins over the years. Let's start with the who. The era of digital innovation at Perkins truly started, I want to say, in the 2000s, I want to say. We were doing CAD and BIM before then, but truly innovation started with the advent of what you call computational design, call it parametric design, the advent of Rhino, Grasshopper. You had technologists that have background in architecture that decided to come to work for firms like Perkins and other large firms because they were interested in trying to push the limits of geometry. So geometry was the starting point. And this is again, how do you use scripts in Rhino Grasshopper or in Autodesk platforms or in S3 platforms to do better geometry and kind of create better shapes, like the Shanghai the Shanghai Museum in China. And this was done in the 2000s. The firm wanted to systematize this a little better. So kind of say 2005-ish, if you may. I want to say, yeah, 2012, 13-ish, I want to say. The firm decided to kind of like organize itself around 8 research labs. So some of the, you should know that the research labs were focused on certain things digital and certain things not digital. So it's a kind of certain things were about human experience, but you can see that some of these were around physical digital innovation. So there was a systematization of the innovation effort around digital innovation of the firm in the early 2010s. Much like any other large firm, we have an innovation incubator program, a fairly successful one. For the last 10 years, we have had lots of calls of entries, and this is around building innovation from the bottom up. Again, half of it, I would say, is physical and human in nature. Half of it is digital in nature. In around 2015, I want to say, we hired a whole bunch of people. Some of them, like kind of from other walks of life, but mostly digital technologists like Nick Cameron, a bunch of people here, because we want to double down on the idea of like digital practice. So how do we elevate this beyond parametric design to take on all aspects of digital computational innovation rather than just around parametric design? So we dabble in the spaces, or Nick's and team dabble in the space around deeper computational design, DFMA, modelless data, the things that are all working on and exploring on if you're in the innovation space, right? AR, VR, MR, and other extended experiences to drive innovation, not just at the global level, but every project. So Nick built a studio of innovators in every studio. We have 30 studios now, deeply committed to doing this level of innovation, not just in one project, but across all projects. Along the way, we also realized in 2018 that some of the stuff that Nick's team is doing can scale and repeat themselves. So instead of doing it at the project level, can we scale some of these into repeatable problems and solve them almost as a startup, right? So this was the startup and IO team, which curiously was started in Chicago, because I happen to live in Chicago. So I hired a bunch of people in Chicago. Thomas is here. A bunch of people are there from Chicago. Fundamentally, a startup, skunkworks, innovation team, labs, whatever you want to call it. But it's not just about architects now. It's architects, engineers, data scientists, UX, UI people, software developers. Can we put them in a room and they create something like a product, like a startup, right? So along the way, we've expanded this, and this has grew around Perkinsville. Now it's beyond Chicago to kind of to the Northeast, where Nervik is from, into the Pacific Northwest, which we have a lot of critical mass in Vancouver and Seattle around that. Now it's moved towards London, and then recently we formed an IO team in Copenhagen, because we have an essential office in Copenhagen. So the idea of a studio, if you kind of step back and look at this, how do you form a studio? I mean, architects and creative folks in architecture, theater, music are drawn to the idea of a studio. What is a studio? Studio is fundamentally, how do you bring in a diversity of talent, give them some room and space and money, kind of leave them alone, deconstruct the silos so they can be nimble and iterative and curious, and ask a whole bunch of what ifs to create something, to invent something on their own. That's the idea of a studio. Idea of studio is not when you give them a problem, they solve it. The studio is when they solve, they find, they explore, they get curious, and they ask a lot about this, what ifs. And along the way, we've done a lot of work in this space, and I'll talk you through a series of examples. Some of these videos will play, some of these may not play. I may stop the video at any point in time. But here is an example of a what if. What if we take the most important data over Revit or Rhino, bring them to a database out of our authoring tools, take data out of Excel, bring them to a database, mesh them, mash them, combine them, do something with them, and present it back in a program in real time as a Power BI dashboard. And what do we make it interesting? Easy, experiential. So you're not a technical person. You can be anyone, a project architect, a project manager, a principal, or a client. Look at this to figure out what's going on in my project. What if we did the same thing using Rhino, a tool that's pretty common use in early design process? And how do you build Rhino? How do you build this workflow of the tabular data and the geometry data for designers to work together on, so they can seamlessly move from the tabular data to the geometry data, or geometry data to the tabular data? And so we built this, and it's called Aries thing. So the first generation was Power BI, the second generation. In fact, Nate's team helped us build the first generation, if I remember right. Keep going. What if you apply this thinking to all of a project? That's the kind of questions that people ask. Instead of one project, and this is a 1.5 million square foot hospital project, I don't know exactly where, but what if we apply this idea to large scale projects to help us shape how buildings respond to a program? Keep going. What if we zoom out and think about like, oops, did I miss it? Sorry. Okay. What if we take a large volume of history of data that we have around details, 1 or million project sheets and all that kind of stuff, push them to the cloud, put a search engine, apply AI, and bring it back to the users so they can search for any detail and get them, like think about a Google search for details. And what if it's easy to use? What if we create a simple tool for our planners at the zoomed out level, at the macro level, to tell stories, a map-based story, think about maps, GIS, meaning PowerPoint, meaning data in a storytelling format, and you don't have to be an expert or a PhD in any of these systems to create this on your own. So we call this tool a spatial composer. Lastly, obviously, we cannot ignore the world of generative AI nowadays, if you may. So with the dawn of AI and generative AI, this age, in the last few years, obviously our studios are dabbling with AI. Obviously, we are creating a whole bunch of explorations and what is around that. And as architects, we are more interested in the generative image space than the generative text space. Don't ask me why, but we are interested in it. So you'll see a bunch of examples of people playing around with all these technologies. And at this point in time, we were stepping back as a leadership team and thinking, why are we doing this really? What is the real problem here to get it solved? Is this a solution to a problem? Is it a solution to the pain point? Are we doing this because it's cool? Are we doing this because there's a problem? So that's going to lead me to the next construct that in my discussion around, are we as technologists falling in love with the solution? Should we not fall in love with the problem? And this is a very well-known, this is a book. If you haven't read the book, please go ahead and read this book. And how do we do that? In order to do that, you need to frame the problem in a very different way. I'm not sure how many VC folks are here. The VC industry does this really well. So how do we adapt from what VCs do really well? VCs start with rigor and discipline. VCs focus on problems before solutions. VCs focus on ROI, teams, values to teams and clients and all of that kind of stuff. VCs think about narrowing the problem down to smaller buckets. And then more importantly, we all want to think about the user. What if we start with the user rather than with the solution? And if we did that, then we instill the idea with this technology, with the studios that we have, we instill the idea of can we bring rigor with the idea of a pitch deck? Again, fundamentally copying from what the VCs are doing. A pitch deck usually starts with a hypothesis, which may be valid or invalid, but you have to test the hypothesis before you put pencil on paper, before you start coding, right? And you have to do this with rigor. You can't talk about a problem, you have to write the problem down. Show it to people. They may like it, they may not like it. If they don't like it, stop. If they like it, ask them again and again and again. And this idea of a rigor-based approach has been resonating very well. So if you think about the first series of solutions around solutions, we started thinking about problems first. What if, again, this is a pretty small problem. And if you're architects working in Revit, it's a pretty well-defined problem. It's one of the most heard of problems in our view with architects working in Revit all day long. Is the idea of printing. Printing, you think it's a simple problem to solve? Apparently, it takes 40 seconds to print a sheet. So convert 40 seconds per sheet to a million sheets, to lots of sheets, to lots of people. That's a lot of time spent, wasted. More importantly, there's a lot of anger when you're doing this, right? So how do you solve for anger? So we built a tool, and this was a tool. We brought a bunch of innovation teams to our Chicago studio. We worked with Autodesk to create a tool. I don't know what Nick calls it. I think it's called Sprint or S-Print. Is that right? It's called S-Print. And it's fundamentally solving one narrow, you think it's a simple problem, but one narrow problem really well. That's all it does. It doesn't do anything else. It just solves a printing problem. And if you really do it like a startup, 40 seconds per sheet converts to 100 sheets per 40 seconds. That's a kind of a 100x ROI. I like the 10x ROI. I'll take the 100x, but I'll take the 10x ROI too. Right? So a good example of a problem first thinking. Expanded again to Area Sync. If you remember Area Sync, which was around Revit and all of that, and Tableau and Power BI coming together. If you invert it and say, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Most of the problems in the architecture space are around scope creep. You create a program and you start drawing and designing, and then before too long, the program is 100,000 square feet, the building becomes 120,000 square feet, and nobody knows or understands. The clients don't understand it, or the clients think it's 100, or project managers think it's 110, or designers think 120 is okay. That's what happens. And then everyone gets angry, and then we come back and rework this, right? So, we do an annual survey with our clients every year. People are generally happy with our work, but the two things that they point out every year for the last 8 years is that schedule and budget, you folks have to do better. So scope creep is a directly proportional to schedule, because of scope creep, you have to start over again, possibly, right? So how do we solve that? And this is the idea of thinking like a product team. Sharing spaces has never been easier. Can we bring everyone together to a single room, to a single framework with which to avoid scope creep? It's scope creep is a problem. So we are trying to instill this on all projects. Area sync at scale on all projects is what we're trying to do. Again, seen not by the designers anymore, seen by the designers, hopefully the clients, hopefully the project teams, and the project manager and the principal. So everyone is on the same page when scope creep happens, at least. And they can hopefully fix it. How am I doing in time? Okay. Another thing, Nick calls it computer-aided drawing. He renamed the acronym again. Instead of just using generative AI for fun, can we use generative AI to generate details? And this is not we are not the only firm trying to solve for this problem. Can we get to a 90% solution, not a 100% solution? So can we have an assisting tool for the designers with a history of knowledge that we have about details? Can we create these to a 90% level so the designers can work on the last 10% rather than the full 100%? Take that idea to cost. We are working with, okay, this is still going. Oops, sorry. Click somewhere, it seems like. Okay. Take the idea of Portfolio Explorer that we showed. Can we do this at scale on all of our projects? So import data from BIM, present data in a very compelling way to our clients to solve real problems, especially for portfolio clients, as they look at portfolios and especially utilization of portfolios across campuses in the post-pandemic world. So we have gotten to a point where we can talk about specific problems, and one of the problems that we are talking about with the client now is in the higher education space. Campus utilization continues to be a problem post-pandemic. So how do we solve for campus utilization using, again, GIS data, meaning BIM data, meaning Excel data, meaning domain data, all together so people can make decisions about campuses so they can have better campuses. So last thing, as we think about this construct, the last dimension of the construct that I want to frame this is around purpose. In my opinion, this industry needs to pay more attention to this construct. We do a pretty good job with the first two. We don't do as good a job with this third one. We are all AEC professionals. We decided to come to this space for a reason, to make the world better. And built environment has a profound impact on lives of people and the planet. We all agree with that. And that is the reason we stay here and innovate from within AEC and not go outside of AEC. There's a reason why we're all here. And that's what got us to the domain. So how do we really change people's lives? Hopefully we're better. How can digital innovation drive this? So the firm, our firm, is fundamentally, since its founding in 1935, has a strong belief that design has the power to make the world better and beautiful at the same time. And this is a project from 1935. We think that we are in it for the greater good. So how does technology help draw this? I'll just play this quick video. The world is getting more complex every day. The rate of change is accelerating. How do we solve big, hairy problems that are structural and systemic at the same time? All these big systemic problems that require a true collaborative effort to do this. And we believe, as technologists, we believe that technology has the power to transform and is really the only way to do this at scale. There's not a whole lot of other ways to do this properly outside of technology. So the question we ask our people and we pose challenges to our people and studios is, how do you drive this with purpose in mind? When we have purpose as a defining characteristic of our projects come out really well. And I'll show you some examples. Here is one example. If you rewind back to April 2020, you all remember those days. Around the pandemic, we had a big client in the Pacific Northwest, and the surge was happening in the Pacific Northwest, if you remember right, New York and Pacific Northwest and Seattle area. And they were anticipating a big COVID surge, massive COVID surge. And they had struggled trying to understand where is the supply of beds and where is the demand for beds. Because they couldn't understand demand, but they know that they have only so much supply. So our team worked, and Thomas was there, but our team worked on, start playing, okay, on using the Portfolio Explorer platform that we had already built somewhere else. Within a matter of days, we took that platform, we brought in the BIM data because we are controlling the BIM data. We brought in the data from the clients around supply and demand, and we created a cool interface for the clients and the doctors and the nurses to fully understand and adapt to the changes in demand and supply on a real-time basis. It's easier for a nurse to understand a plan in 3D in BIM rather than understand the floor plan. Fortunately, we didn't have to put this in place because by the time they were ready to roll out, the surge had stopped. But this is a good example of a purpose-led innovation where there was a clear purpose in mind to impact that impacts people's lives. We keep going to the next one. Here is another project on carbon. Everyone is probably working on carbon. So we also are interested in the carbon space. We think that carbon has and continues to be a challenge facing this industry and the profession. And we have a profound responsibility to decrease carbon, both operational and embodied. So this is an operational carbon tool. In a matter of 5 minutes, working with our partners at Introva, which is a MEP firm, a deep green MEP firm, can you apply a machine learning model to look at 68 million permutations and come back with an operational carbon pathway to reduce carbon? Remember, this is not a perfect science. It's directionally accurate, but it helps enable a conversation with the client on how to reduce carbon as in the early stages of the project. And it is extremely successful in our view. And then the same thing applies to AI. How do you do this deeper down in the design process, not just in the early design process? How do you do this in SD and DD, applying AI to fundamentally address not just visuals and images and text, but how do you use AI to do something meaningful to impact kind of sustainability of climate change? And we think that this is the last example I'll show. This is a Chicago-based example. AAM or urban air mobility is a common thing that gets talked about. So our team looked at a solution or a tool. If you want to play around with it, go to Google for Airformer, you'll see it. How do you look at urban air mobility within the social context, not just within the technological context, within the social context? As vertiports get built and drones start flying, how does it impact people, transit, noise, quality of life, wellness, and all of that? So this is a kind of an easy storytelling approach for cities and transit systems to approach the topic of urban air mobility within a single community. It's a pretty cool solution if you want to look at it. So we think that technology from a purpose standpoint has a room to transform buildings and transform cities. And so there you have it. Okay, I'm doing reasonably okay, it seems like. Okay. There you have it. 3 constructs, just put them all in a single thing. The who, how do you build a studio and get motivated people to come and join us and work for us? How do you frame the problem? How do you apply rigor to framing the problem? And how do you find purpose so we can think about impact of people and people's lives? That's a responsibility. All of these are important. One can argue that one is more important than the other, but we probably have in this group, we have 1/3 of the people that are in the innovation space. You are grounded in the left bucket. I'm guessing 1/3 of the people or 1/4 of the people are in the VC space or like in the sponsorship space. You're in the middle. And then 1/3 of the people probably are academia or universities or nonprofits. You're in the right. And we had to figure out a way to work together. The easiest way to do this is draw a very simple diagram, so it's all easy to understand. In most of our day-to-day lives, we're all looking outside. We're all looking outward because that's what we are wired to do. We are looking at kind of the what ifs. We are looking at problems, or we are looking at purpose, right? My suggestion or call to action as you think about the day's events and the weekend's events is to think about not just looking externally, but looking internally also once in a while. How do you work together? How do you solve for problems together? How does a studio work with, so not just internally, but also sideways. If you think about a counterclockwise movement, can studios, meaning the innovation folks, can they think about the problem better? Can they learn from the ventures? Can the ventures, the people that have the money and the funding and the rigor, can they learn from the people that are driving purpose? Can they organize themselves around purpose? Can the purpose people, the universities and the academia, can they think about an agile, nimble way to solve problems rather than thinking about boiling the ocean? So this counterclockwise movement, in addition to the external and internal, is fundamentally around doing things together, doing things right, and doing the right thing And that's how I define equilibrium. Opposing forces trying to balance, doing it together, doing it right, and doing the right thing. That's my last slide, I think. So let's work together to get there, and let's try towards equilibrium. And I hope you have a great conference and a weekend event. You're all welcome to join Perkinsville. We are hosting an event at 6:30, I want to say. Thank you again for the opportunity.